The pleasure of introducing somebody I don't see often enough, although I think it does go back many, many years that we first met, and we continue to hear about each other long distance, but it's a pleasure for me to bring to our attention now employment, insurance, financial issues for survivors. They loom very large, and we have the pleasure, really, of having Barbara Hoffman with us, who was really one of the founding chairs of the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship, and she's a legal research and writing faculty right at Rutgers, and so she has certainly a very specific and learned orientation to this whole domain. So we look to hear from you.
We've discussed tonight how survivors' lives can be enhanced by information about how cancer affects you and how you can advocate for yourselves. I want to give you a very brief overview of how that works and how cancer affects you at work and some solutions, hopefully, for some problems that you may encounter at work. First, what are the kinds of problems that you could encounter at work because of your cancer? Amgen Pharmaceutical did a very large survey just a few years ago of 500 survivors who were employed at the time they were diagnosed. And they found that most people, when they are working when they're diagnosed, are able to return to work. The good news is most people don't even lose that much work. 59% of the survivors took off fewer than 15 days from work because of cancer treatment and related issues, and only 23% missed more than 30 days. The other good news is most survivors now are really treated fairly at work. We don't see a lot of incidences of blatant discrimination anymore. In that survey, only 6% were fired or laid off because of something related to their cancer treatment, and 13% found that some of their job responsibilities were reduced. But most survivors found that they did not have a negative impact at work because of their diagnosis. And although most employers now do treat survivors fairly, we still see some problems at work because of a cancer diagnosis. So there's some impact that cancer can have on you at work. The most obvious one is loss of health insurance. Most working age adults in the United States get their health insurance through their employment. So if you lose your employment, you're at risk for losing your health insurance. And even if you do have health insurance, then there's the problem of, is the insurance going to pay for your care that your doctor says you're entitled to instead of what a bureaucrat in the insurance company says you're entitled to, because they're trying to cut costs and not necessarily looking to cover the cost of the most important care that you need. A second impact that you could have related to work is simply the loss of finances. Cancer is one of the most expensive medical conditions that we encounter, and losing your job means the loss of the income that's necessary to pay for medical treatment and all the other issues associated with cancer care. A third impact can be the loss of your self-esteem. Most of us who are working associate our job with who we are, what our identity is. And if you aren't able to work anymore or lose your job, then there's some issue with also losing self-esteem, as well as all the other losses we've talked about tonight that are associated with cancer. And finally, one is the balance of work obligations and cancer treatment. We find that survivors are better able now to balance doing your job and undergoing treatment. Some of that is because medical providers are far more sensitive to the needs of survivors, and it's easier now to get, for example, radiation treatments on weekends or on Friday afternoons so you can rest during the weekend. And more survivors are finding they don't have to take off as much time. But one disconcerting thing is some survivors find that they're too afraid to take off from work for fear of losing your job or losing health insurance. In the Amgen survey, 1 in 5 survivors reported that they skipped at least one medical treatment because they didn't want to take off from work or had work that they needed to get done. And even worse, 10% in that group skipped 5 or more treatments because they felt they had a work conflict with their medical issues. So we need to make sure that survivors can balance and that you can take care of your medical needs as well as meet your work needs. I'm going to give you the 2-minute legal course on what your rights are. We have some good news. We now have some very good laws that prohibit cancer-based discrimination. The federal laws are the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Family and Medical Leave Act. And the Americans with Disabilities Act says if you work for an employer with at least 15 workers, you may not be treated differently because of your cancer history. The Family and Medical Leave Act says that if you need to take care of your own medical issues or you're taking care of a dependent with a serious medical need, you can take some medical leave, though under the federal law, it's unpaid leave. Under these laws, especially under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the best thing it gives cancer survivors is it requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations. And for survivors, that might mean something as simple as changing your work hours slightly to accommodate your medical appointments, or some flex time necessary for that, or even changing something physical in the workplace. So, for example, if you can't reach something on a high shelf anymore, to move that to a location that's easier to reach, or to have someone else do that for you. And the Amgen survey found that most survivors who do ask for these types of accommodations are given those accommodations by their employer. So it's really a question of knowing you have the right to ask for them and trying to work out some reasonable, practical solution at work. We also have some good state laws that help survivors. We're lucky to live and work in New Jersey. New Jersey has the New Jersey Law Against Discrimination, which covers small employers, covers all employers, that also prohibits cancer-based employment discrimination. And then we also have some new things coming down in the next few years that will further enhance the rights of cancer survivors. Just a few weeks ago, New Jersey actually joined California and Washington as the only states that provide some paid medical leave, so that if you are the caregiver and you're taking care of someone who has cancer, you can now have some rights to some paid medical leave at work. Something else that hopefully will happen soon is, over the past few years, Congress has debated expanding the Family and Medical Leave Act to provide medical leave provisions to smaller employers. And now that we have elections coming up, it's looking a little more likely that the Family and Medical Leave Act may be amended to provide more help for cancer survivors and their caregivers. And then finally, just a few weeks ago, a law passed called GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, was signed into law by President Bush. And what that law says is, beginning a year from now, health insurance providers and employers can no longer discriminate based on genetic information. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't protect you if you've already had a cancer that's that's genetic based. But if you have been tested for a genetic related cancer and you haven't been diagnosed yet, you cannot be treated differently through your health insurance or through work because of your genetic predisposition. So although we're making a lot of progress on expanding the rights of survivors, what we've really been talking about tonight is the key is we need to empower you with the information, because you are the best advocates for yourselves, not only in issues about work and issues about employment and issues about your finances, but in all the issues we've talked about tonight. So we hope that we can provide you that kind of information so that you can best advocate for yourselves.